Well, as the kids say, she Mothman my Point Pleasant until I prophesy. I'm Aiden Mattis, and welcome back to the Lore Lodge. If you were standing on the West Virginia side of the Ohio River's Silver Bridge at about 5 o'clock p.m. on December 25th, 1967, you might have felt a rumble or heard a strange sound like a guitar string breaking in slow motion. Fractions of a second later, you'd watch as the opposite end of the bridge, on the Ohio side, suddenly disappeared from view. Within an instant, the collapse would work its way eastward across the structure, coming undone piece by piece and taking cars, trucks, and travelers with it, until finally, with a sound like one great shotgun blast, the entire bridge fell into the river. In mere seconds, 32 vehicles plummeted into the Ohio, taking with them 64 people, most of whom would fall victim to drowning, debris, or hypothermia. Ultimately, investigations would determine that the culprit was, as it usually is, improper maintenance of the bridge. Already handling more traffic than it was built to withstand, one of the bridge's outdated eyebars snapped, and that one failure kickstarted a chain reaction which led to the rest of the structure rapidly becoming imbalanced. It was a simple, avoidable oversight, but it was one that nobody saw coming. Or was it? Some residents of Point Pleasant, West Virginia weren't so sure, largely due to a series of unexplained events which had gripped the town over the previous year. Some witnesses claimed to have seen UFOs, others told stories of being visited by men in black with strange questions and yet stranger behaviors, but what really stuck in people's minds were the stories of encounters with what appeared to be a large, red-eyed, winged man. Now, those sightings had begun in November of 1966, affecting everyone from teenage couples to traveling shoe salesmen as they continued through the rest of that year and deep into the one following it. Then, as suddenly as they had begun, the encounters just stopped. Mothman, as the papers had taken to calling the creature, simply ceased to appear after one last sighting in November 1967. 1 month later, seemingly without warning, disaster struck the Silver Bridge. And some people couldn't help but wonder if maybe, just maybe, the Mothman wasn't some unknown terror, but a harbinger, warning them of the tragedy to come. In the 50-plus years which have followed the appearance and subsequent disappearance of the Mothman, the legend has only grown. Today, Point Pleasant has an annual Mothman festival to commemorate the bizarre incident and the creature associated with it, but not everything related to the anomaly has been quite as positive. Sightings have been recorded or reported elsewhere, and not just in the United States. Mothman, it's said, has been seen before bombings, earthquakes, and even, as some claim, before the 1986 disaster at Chernobyl. So I was surprised that when I initially looked into this topic back in 2022, I found very little in the way of information on the original Mothman sightings back in Point Pleasant in 1966, at least in the papers. How, I asked myself, did this small-town legend become something so widespread that it could reach places as far-flung as Eastern Europe or Japan? The answer, it seems, is the work of a journalist by the name of John Keel, author of the 1975 book The Mothman Prophecies, which inspired the 2002 movie of the same name. Keel's nearly 300-page book covers everything from the initial sightings to the visits by shadowy figures, and all in the context of the broader paranormal world surrounding the events taking place in Point Pleasant. What's more, he was there on the ground in November of 1967, and if he's to be believed, there is much more to this story than just a few sightings by the locals. The question is, can Keel be believed? Or is the Mothman Prophecies just another entry into the same genre which produced concepts like the Philadelphia Experiment, the Bridgewater Triangle, and other such stories which make extraordinary claims but fall flat when those championing them are asked to produce the equally extraordinary evidence? One claim for which we do have evidence, though, is that it do be a little chilly in here today because we forgot to turn the stove on. But thankfully, today's sponsor, Fabletics, provided just the thing I need to stay cozy here in our cold, cold stone building. Yeah, this thing do be cozy, and I'm not surprised, because back in 2014, Fabletics set out to revolutionize the athletic wear industry by combining the pinnacle of form and function, blending a unique fashion sense with an obsession for quality to create the ultimate luxury athletic wear. Rather than just taking a one-size-fits-all approach, Fabletics provides a wide range of optimized clothing for both men and women, with soft but durable high-performance materials featuring bold prints and colors, or in this case, a nice, simple black, and all at an affordable price point. The moisture-wicking quick-dry material features internal and external pockets to provide a flexible yet supportive base for all your active needs. And I know that, clothing ads might seem a little out of place on this channel, but I do like to be cozy. Also, when I don't have a sprained UCL, I like to go to the gym. I like to go for hikes. I do, in fact, get outside. Not as often as I should, but this stuff has made it very comfortable even into the colder months of the year. So I genuinely, we do make a point to only advertise for products we think are useful and we think are high quality on this channel. Fabletics fits that category. I genuinely like what I'm wearing right now. Like, if you came up to me on the street and I was wearing my Fabletics and you said, Aiden, that stuff's tight. Should I get some? I would be like, yeah, you should. And I would also tell you that with our exclusive link, you can get access to their VIP intro offer, which includes up to 80% off your first order when you sign up to become a new Fabletics VIP. This also includes an optional member credit if you wish to shop for a given month, allowing your VIP payment to unlock a bundle kit or any item up to $100. So, if you'd like to give Fabletics a try and become a VIP member, check out our link in the description below. Fingers of lightning tore holes in the black skies as an angry cloudburst drenched the surrealist landscape. It was 3 a.m. on a cold, wet morning in late November of 1967, and the little houses scattered along the dirt road winding through the hills of West Virginia were all dark. Along the road came a stranger in a land where strangers were rare and suspect. He was over 6 feet tall and dressed entirely in black. This is, with some mild editing, how John Keel introduces himself to the world in the Mothman prophecies, in a chapter entitled Beelzebub Comes to West Virginia. You can almost hear him thumping his fingers along to Black Sabbath as he wrote of his evening spent trying to find a phone with which to call a tow truck. As Keel's story goes, he was in town to talk about UFOs, but not the kind that come from space. No, John Keel wasn't so silly as to believe in that kind of thing. But more on that later. See, Keel was no stranger to West Virginia, and this part in particular was a favored haunt for the traveling student of the unknown. This time, however, he came on the trail of a series of encounters which defied the traditional UFO story. It all began around 10:30 p.m. on November 14th, 1966, when Newell Partridge's TV began to malfunction. Though Keel didn't get the details of this story himself, he says that he received them from a trusted friend and fellow researcher named Gray Barker, who himself claimed to have interviewed the witness in person. According to Barker, Partridge explained that he was just sitting there watching when a real fine herringbone pattern appeared on the tube, and at the same time, the set started a loud whining noise, winding up to a high pitch, peaking and breaking off, as if you were on a musical scale and went as high as you could and came back down and repeated it. It sounded like a generator winding up. Just then, Partridge says that his 3-year-old German Shepherd, Bandit, began to whine from outside. The dog was sitting on the end of the porch, he reportedly said, howling down toward the hay barn in the bottom. The farmer got up, shined a flashlight in the direction the dog had been looking, and the beam picked up 2 red circles or eyes, which looked like bicycle reflectors. As soon as they appeared, Bandit leapt from the porch, snarling as he charged towards the mysterious intruder. Partridge, however, remained frozen, years of hunting experience telling him that something about those eyes wasn't quite right. Perhaps he was correct, because Bandit didn't come back that night, nor did he return the following morning. And for a dog that never strayed from home for more than 15 minutes at a time, that was unusual. Archie is just passed out on the floor at my feet. Dude would never go charging into the night after the Mothman. Anyway, it took Newell Partridge until the next morning to work up the courage to go looking for the shepherd, when while he managed to track Bandit to the barn easily enough, things quickly got weird. Around the spot where he believed he'd seen the eyes, some 150 yards away from the house, there was a circle of dog prints, but no tracks leading away from that spot. It looked as though Bandit had run from the porch to the barn, chased a tail for a little while, and then simply vanished. About an hour and a half later, and 80 or so miles to the southwest, Another bizarre encounter was about to unfold. Two young couples from Point Pleasant, Mr. and Mrs. Roger Scarberry and Mr. and Mrs. Steve Millette, were driving through the TNT area, which was a large complex of munitions storage bunkers from World War II just outside of Point Pleasant to the east, which had been turned by this point into a wildlife sanctuary. I forgot to write that into the episode. I meant to have a Point Pleasant history section, but at 2 a.m. last night, I was too tired to write it, so here we are. They were driving through the TNT area in Scarberry's 1957 Chevy, writes Keel. Though he never explicitly says in this book that he interviewed the couple, the author's wording throughout the entire chapter very much suggests that he did. And as he tells it, they were out looking for friends, but no one seemed to be out that night. With the hour growing late, the group decided they'd just make their way back into town. So 18-year-old Roger was driving, and as they passed by an old derelict power plant inside of the TNT area, his wife, Linda, suddenly let out a gasp. They all looked into the blackness, Keel writes, and saw two bright red circles, about 2 inches in diameter and 6 inches apart. 18-year-old Mary Millette, who John Keel, who was at the time of writing this book in his 50s, described as a strikingly attractive brunette, was the first to speak, shouting, "What is it?" from the back seat of the car. It's not illegal, but that doesn't mean it's not weird. Anyway, before anyone could answer, the lights bobbed away from the building, and despite the aforementioned total blackness, they all realized with horror that the lights were attached to some huge animal. It was hard to say what they were actually looking at, but they could tell it was grayish in color, and it walked on sturdy, man-like legs, first walking towards them before turning back towards the power plant and shuffling inside through an open door. According to Keel, it was Steve Millette who broke the silence this time when he yelled, "Let's get out of here." This entire thing is a Scooby-Doo episode. Now, Roger didn't need much convincing, flooring the accelerator and speeding out onto the road leading towards Route 62. Not long after leaving the gates of the TNT area, however, the creature reappeared, this time standing on a small hill near the roadside, but then suddenly it spread its bat-like wings and shot straight into the air and began chasing after them. Roger turned hard onto the highway, the Millettes screaming from the back seat that it was still following them, which prompted Roger to push the Chevy towards its limits. "We were doing 100 miles an hour, Keel quotes Roger, and that bird kept right up with us. It wasn't even flapping its wings." Keel writes that Mary then added, "I could hear it making a sound. It squeaked like a big mouse." Roger, it would seem, followed that up by telling Keel that it followed us right to the city limits. Upon reaching Point Pleasant, the group went straight to the authorities to explain what they'd seen, and Deputy Millard Halstead jumped into his car to follow them back to where they'd first encountered the strange flying creature. Now, according to Keel, Halstead told him directly that he'd known these kids all their lives, adding that they'd never been in any trouble and they were really scared that night, which it seems had factored into his decision to go out there with them. When they arrived, though, there was no sign of the red-eyed, winged thing which had so recently chased them away from the old power plant. Oddly, when Halstead switched on his police radio to report back to dispatch, the system malfunctioned, and a very loud signal blasted out of the speaker. Halstead was perturbed and decided to hold off on searching the building. But, Keel writes, he was convinced. There was one thing Roger mentioned, however, the importance of which none of them could have known at the time. "Funny thing," he said while recounting the story to Keel, "we noticed a dead dog by the side of the road there. A big dog. But when we came back a few minutes later, the dog was gone." I want to use you as a prop, but you're sleeping. Strange, isn't it? That just an hour and a half after Newell Partridge watched Bandit run off into the darkness towards a pair of reflective red lights, the Scarberrys and Millettes spotted a large dead dog on the side of the road as they fled from some red-eyed creature. Could it really just be a coincidence, or was there a connection? Now, John Keel would certainly have you believe that there was, but how much can we really trust him? See, as I compared John Keel's work to the reports from the time, I began to notice some contradictions. Well, that's the whole point, you might say. Keel's work is the investigative journalism that those small-town reporters weren't willing to do. To that I say, perchance, but hear me out first. Let's start from the beginning, because it isn't where John Keel actually said it was. No, the real beginning of the Mothman story was on November 12th, 1966, when Blue Creek, West Virginia resident Kenneth Duncan and several others were digging a grave for his brother-in-law. It was gliding through the trees and was in sight for about a minute, Duncan told the press. describing what he referred to as something that looked like a brown human being with a wingspan of some 10 feet. Now, I would say it was Michael Jordan, but it's too early for that. Now, it should be said that the other men present with Duncan that day said they didn't see anything of the sort, but it wasn't long before the unexplained entity appeared once again. Just a few days later, on Tuesday, November 15th, building contractor Newell Partridge would become the second West Virginian to catch a glimpse of the mystery creature when it visited his farm later that night. Now, to be fair, the majority of the story matches with what Keel wrote from that point on, at least as with regard to Newell Partridge. He told the paper that his television reception was interrupted by a generator noise so severe that he had to turn off the set, and it's not quite the vivid herringbone description from the Mothman prophecies, but it's close enough. For the most part, the differences with Partridge's story can be written off as embellishments on Barker's part. We're talking adding details like the barn being 150 yards away, a lengthy explanation of the sound he heard right before Bandit took off, specific language about a cold chill coming over Partridge, and so on. The only important differences here are the fact that there's no mention in the paper of there being a circle of paw prints around the spot where the eyes were seen, and the date, which is uniformly reported in the papers as being the 15th, not the 14th like Barker and Keel claimed. And normally I wouldn't harp on dates being off by a day, but when you have someone claiming to have first-hand interviews and knowledge, especially of something widely reported in the papers, that's an important discrepancy. And in this case, the date is actually only the tip of the iceberg. The contradictions become a lot more important when we get into what is arguably the best-known part of the Mothman story, outside of the Silver Bridge collapse, that being the car chase which happened 90 minutes after Bandit is said to have disappeared. According to the Richmond, Indiana-based Palladium item, it all started shortly before midnight on Wednesday the 16th, when Steve Millett, his wife Mary, and another young married couple, Roger and Linda Scarberry, were out for a drive in the McClintock Wildlife Station about 5 miles outside of Point Pleasant. While the basics of that story remain the same, the little changes in detail matter quite a bit when you consider that Keel was definitely implying that he directly interviewed these witnesses, and that he was reciting their words to him. As Steve told the paper, the 4 young people, all in their late teens or early 20s, came over a little rise in the road out near the old power plant when they saw the eyes over in the bushes. But unlike the version given by Keel, whatever it was didn't step out, nor did it shuffle into an open door to the power plant. There's no mention of anyone seeing a big gray body, and according to the papers, Steve actually initially wrote this off as a raccoon or some other animal. It was only as they steered out of the wildlife station and onto the paved road back towards town that they caught a glimpse of its full form when they spotted the figure sitting on the bank across the road. This time, though, they got a much better look at it, and it wasn't just a pair of eyes. The second sighting revealed the creature's man-like form, reads the November 17th article from the Palladium item. It stood over 6 feet tall, its wings protruding from the center of its back like an angel. Stranger still, it appeared to have no arms, and its face was hard to distinguish. Whatever it was, it didn't stay put, nor did it move in the way described by Keel. Contrary to his description of it walking on sturdy man-like legs, the witnesses said that it walked clumsy, like a penguin.
Just smile and wave, boys. Smile and wave.
They only really became concerned when it suddenly spread those wings and shot straight up into the air. Going by the contemporary reports, Roger, the man at the wheel, didn't need any goading from Steve to get moving. Acting on instinct, he peeled out of the wilderness area and onto the paved road, only to realize that the thing was hovering above the car, casting a shadow over the back window. How it was casting a shadow over the back window in the middle of the night, I'm not really sure, but I'm not going to question that part. The women were crying, Steve was trying to keep his eyes on the thing, and Roger was flooring the pedal. I was doing 100 to 105 miles an hour, and it was just gliding over the top, sort of moving side to side, he told the press. You could hear a flapping noise, then it came down at the car, making a squealing noise like a mouse. Then, when they turned on Route 62, it just vanished. And right here we have a few more problems with the Keel narrative, which, once again, he really implies is directly from the source. But if it was, then why did he mix up who was saying what, and tell us that it was Mary who said the thing made a squealing noise when the paper clearly says that was Roger? Why did he mix up what the chronology of events was and have this weird little part where they saw the thing before they saw the thing? And why did he say that the creature chased them all the way to Point Pleasant when the papers all very clearly quote them as saying that it stopped when they turned onto Route 62? The biggest differences, though, have to do with what happened after Deputy Halstead got involved. Similar to how it was reported by Keel, the kids immediately went to the police and the sheriff's department when they reached Point Pleasant, and then took Deputy Halstead back to the rambling old brick building, that's how the paper describes it, where they'd first spotted the eyes. It's about the end of the accurate statements from the author here. There's absolutely no mention of the police radio squawking like that, or really anything else that he said happened that night, most importantly with regard to the dead dog on the side of the road. There is not a single reference to that anywhere in any of the papers. Not even the ones which include both encounters from that night, which suggests to me that Keel invented the detail about the dog in order to draw a more concrete connection between the two events. It looks like a classic case of overselling the story. Now, ironically, if Keel had just gone with the actual narrative instead of putting words into the mouth of the witnesses or manipulating what they actually said, he'd have produced a much more compelling story. You see, in an unusual turn of events for stories like this, the article in the Palladium item reports that Deputy Millard Holstead, I wrote it two ways here and I'm not sure which was right, to be honest. Anyway, he was present when shadows circled the building, though he would only say that he had seen a cloud of dust rise from an adjacent coal yard, which, in his words, could have been the bird. But was it a bird? Apparently, the authorities took the possibility that it wasn't seriously enough and dispatched an armed posse of deputies, city police, and others to the deserted power plant the following night. And what they found there forced them to confront an uncomfortable question. If the Scarberrys and Millettes hadn't seen anything, then why did law enforcement find oval-shaped footprints measuring about 4.5 inches across and fresh animal droppings none of the natives could identify? If the goal of the little expedition had been to prove that there actually wasn't anything to be afraid of here, it backfired spectacularly. Residents were upset, reported the Scranton Tribune via the UPI wire service, and the speculation was that the thing lives in one of the abandoned boilers of the power plant. That part may have come from a daytime investigation on Wednesday by Millette, Scarberry, and several deputies, who claim Millette saw something fly up inside a boiler when he kicked open a door. Whatever it was, they hadn't stuck around to see if it came back, and when the prints were found later that night, what had been perceived as a joke at first began to seem very real. That same night, as armed men were crawling over the old power plant, another set of people witnessed the monster of Mason County, as it would be called in those early days. But once again, the story of precisely what happened there differs between the articles written as the events unfolded and the version presented by John Keel. As he tells it, Raymond Wamsley and his wife Marcella were on their way to visit with Ralph and Virginia Thomas, the latter woman being an alleged psychic, according to the author. She was careful not to seek attention, and only her friends knew of her remarkable abilities, Keel writes, explaining away the fact that there's not a single mention of her abilities anywhere else. But regardless of that, on this evening, neither Ralph nor Virginia were home. The important part of the story is that Raymond and Marcella were just getting back into their car after talking with the Thomas children for a moment, when suddenly a figure shifted in the darkness behind them. Keel claims that Marcella told him during an interview that it seemed as if it had been lying down, and then it slowly rose up from the ground. She described it as a big gray thing, bigger than a man, with terrible glowing red eyes. Of course, none of that actually made it to the papers, which only reported that Raymond Wamsley and his wife, Marcella Bennett, and Ricky Thomas told Mason County Sheriff George Johnson that they saw the thing too in the same general area, which is an interesting statement for a couple of reasons. First of all, Keel claims that during his interview, he was told that the Thomases weren't home, while the papers, mostly just reprinting the same UPI story, suggested that Raymond, Marcella, and Ricky Thomas all saw it at the same time, and therein lies another issue. Keel refers to Ralph Thomas, but the press clearly calls him Ricky. Ricky is not a nickname for Ralph. Could it be a mistake or a situation where Ralph inexplicably had the nickname Ricky? Sure. But it's important to note these discrepancies when someone is claiming to have information that never made it to the papers, and especially when that information contradicts the reporting. That isn't the end of the differences between Keel's version of events and versions pitched to the public either. For example, he writes that on the afternoon of November 17th, a Thursday, a 17-year-old boy was driving down Route 7 outside of Cheshire, Ohio, when a huge bird suddenly dove at his car and pursued him for a mile or so. The problem is that when the Columbus Dispatch reported on the same incident on November 18th, 1966, they told a very different story. After summarizing the Millettes and Scarberry story of being chased by a red-eyed winged creature, the Dispatch went on to explain that on Wednesday night, While hundreds, many with weapons, searched the TNT area, a Cheshire, Ohio man who asked that his name not be used said it chased him near Gallipolis. The article doesn't describe it as a huge bird, nor does it place the incident on Thursday, or even in the afternoon. To me, it appears that Keel, much like a certain Bigfoot enthusiast, lifted that story for his book, then changed some details around in order to make it look like these sightings occurred at 2 different times on 2 different days. But why? It might have something to do with the rest of the article, which is actually titled, "High School Science Club Says Beast May Be One of Its Weather Balloons." And I know all the UFO people in the audience are going, of course it's a weather balloon, but hang on. According to the Dispatch, Edward Pritchard of Huntington, the science club advisor at Proctorville, suggested that the balloons released by the club may have been responsible for some, if not all, of the sightings. Apparently, the students had recently released 2 4x7-foot balloons to study wind currents, which would have taken them over Mason County at the appropriate time. Now, that could have explained the sightings in the air, but it doesn't account for what the Millettes, Scarberrys, Wamsleys, Ricky Thomas, and Newell Partridge all claim to have seen on the ground. Nor did it explain what 2 Point Pleasant firemen, Paul Yoder and Benjamin Enochs, saw on the 18th, or what a group of teenagers driving by Campbell's Creek witnessed on the 20th. According to Keel, Yoder and Enochs were in the TNT area when they encountered a giant bird with big red eyes. Keel then quotes the men, writing, "It was definitely a bird," they said flatly, "but it was huge. We'd never seen anything like it." Now that sounds innocuous enough, but remember how I said it looks like he's been pretending to have interviewed people when he really just read the papers and then embellished things? Let's focus on the "they said flatly" part there. It makes it sound like Keel was quoting them from an interview he himself conducted, right? Well, in reality, that's the exact phrasing used in the AP article about the sighting. Or at least it's almost the exact same, because the reports don't include the "we'd never seen anything like it" part, just the bit where they said they were sure it's a bird. And where did that story about the 5 teenagers come from? The author claims that they got the shock of their lives when their headlights bounced off a man-sized bird-like creature standing behind a rock quarry, which then scurried into the woods. But that doesn't show up anywhere in the papers. Perhaps just as importantly, why does Keel's 1970 book, Strange Creatures from Time and Space, mention the exact same story on the exact same date, but with 6 teenagers instead of 5? The only name associated with it in either book is Brenda Jones, and I couldn't find any articles referencing that name in association with Campbell's Creek or the events described in Keel's books. I also can't find anything which involves both Campbell's Creek and a story about a birdman seen near a quarry. The same can be said about a number of other Mothman sightings referenced by Keel, either in the Mothman Prophecies or Strange Creatures from Time and Space, a book covering everything from what he calls the bedroom invaders to the hairy ones. In fact, I was actually reading through that book when I found what I'd been looking for, that being an open statement from Keel that he had, in fact, interviewed the Scarberys and Millettes, among others he described in the later book. So, if he interviewed them, why all the contradictory statements when compared to contemporary reporting? If Keel hadn't displayed a tendency to present newspaper article quotes as the product of his own research, we might be able to say he learned this information directly from the sources, but for obvious reasons, we can't say that. Now, I'll admit it's possible that Keel did genuinely go and speak with all of these people he refers to, but there's good reason to believe that even if he did, he probably didn't report their words accurately. The prime example of John Keel's method of deception is the story of Tom Urey, which went to print about a week after all of the initial sightings were reported. Now, as Keel tells it, at 7:15 a.m. on November 25th, a young shoe salesman named Tom Urey was driving along Route 62 just north of the TNT area when he noticed a tall, gray, man-like figure standing in a field by the road. Now, Keel says he got this narrative from Mary Heyer, who is a close colleague of Keel's who wrote for the Athens Messenger in Athens, Ohio, and one of Tom's former employers from when he was a newspaper delivery boy. And apparently during this conversation between Tom and Mary, Tom allegedly explained that suddenly it spread a great pair of wings and took off straight up like a helicopter. From there, it followed his convertible and began going in circles 3 telephone poles high. Somehow it kept pace with the car, despite Tom pushing the speedometer past 70 miles an hour, until he made it into Point Pleasant, where he went straight to the sheriff's office to report the sighting. The thing is, that is decidedly not what Tom told the Point Pleasant Register. While the register's version of the story did have the same language about the thing veering over his car, following him at 70 miles an hour, and flying in circles 2 or 3 telephone poles high, there are critical differences with regard to what he actually saw. For one, Tom said nothing about seeing a tall, gray, man-like figure standing in a field, nor did he say it shot straight up like a helicopter. What he actually said was that a flying object that seemed to come from the woods on his right came up like a helicopter. Not only that, but in the newspaper account, he was driving north, away from Point Pleasant, and the thing gave up the chase as he passed Kirkland Memorial Gardens on his way home to Clarksburg. So, not in a field, in the woods, not going to Point Pleasant, not chased straight into Point Pleasant. You know what, we're getting to it. Basically, to make matters worse for John Keel, Tom himself spoke at the Mothman Festival in 2011, and he completely contradicted Keel's claims. "I got about 6 miles north of town and caught something out of the corner of my eye," he told the crowd. "I thought it was a helicopter coming over the trees from the riverbank about a quarter mile away." And just in case you needed any more evidence that Keel is full of it, I'm about to give you a direct, unedited quote from Tom's speech that day. "Kurt, the moth mood lighting. I'm interested to see what you do with this." Thank you. Most authors are pretty legitimate, but you don't write a book based on a lot of facts in John Keel's book. I found a lot of errors in his, especially about what he wrote about what I said I saw. I never met the man. Now, as for Mary Hyre, Tom saw what she'd written about him in the paper, and when he came back to town a couple of weeks later to visit his parents, he made sure to stop by her office to let her know exactly what he thought of her work. To quote the man directly, his exact words were, "Mary, I ought to shoot you." Now, one of the few situations in which Keel's account actually does match that of the newspapers was in the case of Connie Carpenter, who the author claims told him that she had seen a giant winged man in broad daylight. It was around 10:30 a.m. on November 27th when, as she passed the deserted greens of the Mason County Golf Course outside of New Haven, West Virginia, she suddenly saw a huge gray figure. According to Connie, it was shaped like a man, but was much larger, at least 7 feet tall and very broad. What attracted her attention the most, however, was not its size, but its eyes, which she described as large, round, fiercely glowing red eyes that focused on her with hypnotic effect. Not only that, but as she slowed down, her eyes fixed on the apparition, a pair of wings unfolded from its back, which seemed to have a span of about 10 feet. Now, this was no ordinary bird, Keel assures us, but a man-shaped thing which rose slowly off the ground, straight up like a helicopter, silently, with wings that didn't flap in flight. It headed straight towards Connie's car, its horrible eyes fixed to her face, and then swooped low over her head as she shoved the accelerator into the floorboards in pure hysteria. It's a visceral description. And moreover, it does match with the one newspaper article about the incident that I could find, that being the one posted on the Mothman fandom wiki with a suspicious lack of attribution to any particular newspaper. Now, the article isn't nearly so detailed, but it does include the language about a man-like thing with a big wingspan, so, it seems legit, right? Wrong, because Connie Carpenter wasn't just some local girl. She was Mary Hyre's niece, which means we can't take anything she allegedly said as truthful. This shouldn't even really be surprising, considering the total lack of credibility Keel fosters through patently false statements in other portions of his work. And I'm not even referring to the fact that half of the Mothman prophecies is a weird diatribe about UFOs, interdimensional beings, and men in black, with very little focus on the supposed subject matter of the book. For example, on page 19 of the Mothman prophecies, Keel says that there are archaeological sites in the Mississippi Valley which have been dated to 8,000 years ago, long before the Indians are supposed to have arrived. This is hilariously inaccurate, as the Native American presence in that area dates to at least 12,000 years ago, which is something that was known to archaeologists long before the 1970s. He also claims that some of the Indian mounds are laid out and constructed with the same kind of mathematical precision found in the pyramids of Egypt, which is simply not true. There is nothing north of Mexico which remotely compares to what exists on the Giza Plateau. And then we have the bizarre assertion that there were no Native Americans in West Virginia, and that the absence of an Indian tradition in West Virginia is troublesome for the researcher. In reality, the area was home to multiple native cultures, including the Monongahela, the Fort Ancient, and at one point even the Susquehannock. And this was not a mystery in 1975. We knew this. Another fundamental issue which appears in the book is Keel's inability or unwillingness to consider simple explanations and instead jump directly to the most out-of-left-field reasoning possible. Keeping with the Native American issue for the moment, Keel follows up his comments about the age of Native American mounds by writing that some are built in the shape of elephants, and asking, what did they use for a model? He doesn't actually cite any monuments, but he's probably talking about one of the effigy mounds in Wisconsin, which archaeologists say was originally an oval and only incidentally looks like an elephant. And I know that's not going to satisfy the ancient astronaut theory people, but I don't care. I mean, I'd be a lot more willing to believe that it was a mastodon that somehow was described to them for 10,000 years after its extinction, that Native Americans in the year 1000 AD somehow got a glimpse of an elephant. Like, this just isn't old enough to be the kind of mystery he's pitching it as. He also notes that others are in the shape of sea serpents, apparently not considering that Serpent Mound might just be modeled after a snake. Sea serpents, because there's no land serpents, as we all know. All of this gets wrapped up in a bow with the statement that to plan and build such mountains of shaped earth required technical skills beyond the simple nomadic woods Indians, which isn't true on its face and also doesn't matter because the Mississippians and their immediate predecessors were not simple nomadic woods Indians. They had large-scale agriculture. They had trade routes that reached to the Rockies. Cahokia had a population of 40,000 at its peak. But somehow, against all odds, this gets worse. On page 70, Keel writes that the Cherokees have a tradition, according to Benjamin Smith Barton's New Views of the Origins of the Tribes and Nations of America, 1798. If you're a frequent viewer of the channel, you already know where this is going. That when they migrated to Tennessee, they found the region inhabited by a weird race of white people who lived in houses and were apparently quite civilized. Keel asserts that the fierce Indians ran these moon-eyed people out before asking, did they move to West Virginia to escape their tormentors? Now, that is not what Barton wrote, nor is it remotely close to being the sum total of what we know about the quote-unquote moon-eyed people. Keel would have known that if he actually bothered to read up on the subject, which he could have easily done, since basically everything we have on them was published before the year 1900, and by the Smithsonian, no less. If you're interested in our video on the moon-eyed people, then that is linked in the description, I hope. Now, what Barton actually said was that the Cherokee tell us that when they first arrived in the country which they inhabit, they found it possessed by certain moon-eyed people who could not see in the daytime. These wretches they expelled. Possibly, the moon-eyed people driven away by the Cherokee were the ancestors of the albinos who inhabited the Isthmus of Darien, and of whom Lionel Wafer has given us an account. The Isthmus of Darien, for those unaware, is Panama. Now, like I said, we'll try and link our Moon-Eyed People video in the description if I remember to do so, but the short version is that every grain of information about them goes against what Keel says here. This is without even getting into the fact that Keel veers directly into a version of ancient astronaut theory, just without the astronauts, and in part by conflating the vision which led to the conversion of the Apostle Paul with some story about the man being zapped by a beam weapon. Now, to his credit, Keel does call out Eric von Daniken, but only to the extent that he says that the idea of ancient monumental structures being built by extraterrestrials is a ridiculous concept. Ironically, he makes the accusation that von Daniken's theories are based on expansive misinterpretations and, in several instances, deliberate misrepresentations of archaeological curiosities. In order to write that, I have to imagine Keel was either fully aware that he was taking people for a ride, or he was genuinely one of the least self-aware people ever. All of that said, there were a lot of sightings of something in West Virginia that year, and even if anything after the first week could be written off as mass hysteria or people simply imagining things, that doesn't explain what the Scarberrys, Millettes, and Wamsleys saw on that first night in November of 1966. Some say that it was just a particularly large sandhill crane, others that it was an owl of some kind. Tom Urey swears that what he saw was no ordinary bird, though, as do many others. After all, there aren't many such cranes in West Virginia. I think there was a population of maybe 35 in total in the entire country at the time. And there are quite a few stories of giant birds among the nation's native peoples. Maybe Mothman is akin to the legendary Thunderbird, maybe it's a harbinger of doom, or maybe the real Mothman is the friends we made along the way. Now, I'll be honest, I did initially intend to do more in this video about the legend of Mothman in particular, but I decided that in order to do that, I want to go to Point Pleasant and I want to interview people. So I think what we'll do is we'll do a Mothman special where we go down there. I'll probably go down once during the year, just at a normal time, and then again during Mothman Fest, and so we'll put that out probably a year from now. We plan things in advance now, sometimes. But yeah, in this case, I wanted to tackle where the overarching legend seems to come from, which is, so far as I can tell, almost entirely John Keel just either misrepresenting things or making them up. I feel like I really need to go interview people in person in order to know which parts of what he was saying aren't fabricated, aren't misrepresented or colored or biased. I want to go speak to people who actually live there, and maybe their parents or their grandparents were there for what happened and they got the story directly from them, so that I can kind of compare and contrast directly with what Keel said. But that's going to have to wait, so I hope you enjoyed this breakdown of yet another con man, because I guess this is what we do now. I also do want to give a shout out. This is the first video that I have had somebody help me research and outline. And that was a local guy by the name of Harrison Dutton, who is a horror author, who reached out and asked if he could try and help us out. So I think it went pretty well overall. And I just want to say thank you to Harrison, and you can actually check out his work online. I will pop a link to a recently published story of his into the description. Now, with all of that said, if you do like what we do here at the Lodge, if you want to lure your lodge a little bit more frequently and perhaps ad-free, you can do so by checking us out on Patreon for just $1 a month. Really helps us keep the lights on, and that basically pays the rent for this place. We'd love for it to pay for more than the rent for this place, so if you want to do that, go ahead. We still do have a couple of spots left on our Trova trip as of recording this, our 2 next summer to Yosemite and the Colorado Rockies. Those will also be linked in the description. Other ways to support us, you can check us out on Bunker Branding and get our merch. You can feel like you're wearing our skin, but it's a nice soft cotton blend. Our skin isn't. Kind of wish it was. That would be hype. We get so heavy when we go swimming, though. I don't want cotton skin. Anyway, you can also drink our coffee. You can taste the Lodge. You can put the Lodge in you. And really lodge the lore into your body in liquid form. If you're looking for more Lodge, you can get it by going to History Unhinged, The Weird Bible. I'm not sure what the situation with Weird Bible is right now. I haven't had time to film the new show, but we're working on it. It's getting done. History Unhinged, however, gets new content every 2 weeks, and that has a Patreon of its own, which is ad-free, has extra segments. You're free to check that out. What else is there? Discord. We have a Discord. And we have Silver Retention. I forgot about Silver Retention. Thornbury started a new channel that does deep dives into the making of films. I'll be guesting on that occasionally when there's some lore to go over. But what else is there? There's Discord. That's bit.ly/join the lodge. It is linked in the description. We also have our live show. It will already have happened by the time this goes out, but we're having Flint Dibble on Monday. Live show usually is live at 7 p.m. Monday nights, unless it's not. We'll tell you if it's not. We also are on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all of that. You can check that out with both this show and the live show. They go live a couple of days after these go up on YouTube. Once again, I'd like to thank Fabletics for sponsoring this video. That is such a cozy sweatshirt, and I'm going to be wearing it out of the studio today. All right, I'm Aiden Madison. Thanks for stopping by the Lore Lodge.